up on all of the different platforms around town. Let's see. Let's make sure that this is working before we get moving and grooving. And it looks like we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here in Scottsdale, Arizona. And over the course of many years, my team and I, we've been successful. We've represented a lot of people who've been facing criminal charges and unfortunately been required to go through the criminal justice system. And so what we decided to do is, because we've seen so many issues, so much malfeasance, so much misconduct in our criminal justice system, we decided to start this program called Watching the Watchers Live. And we do a live show. Currently, it's every day right now at about this time on this channel. And the reason we do this show is because there's a lot of information, I think, that is being overlooked as it relates to our justice system, and in sort of a broader sense, our legal system, our system of justice, the way that we conduct ourselves as citizens, as members of a society that is trying to function. And we've been witnessing a lot of problems in that arena this entire year, right? Coronavirus, we've seen battles going on all over the country in various states about what to do as a result of the virus. Should we lock down? Should we quarantine? Should we have mask mandates? Should we close the gyms? Should we require testing and all sorts? There's issues that we could talk about ad nauseum. We've seen the George Floyd protests. We've seen a BLM protest. We've seen Antifa rise up. We've seen attempts to kidnap governors underway. And so society in general is trying to figure out how to function in light of the coronavirus, and our national elections are not immune from that conversation. So today what we're going to be doing is spending a lot of time talking about the lawsuits that are taking place across the country here in the United States. The election is just right around the corner. We're a couple weeks away from that. And what we're seeing right now is a lot of these lawsuits that have been percolating under the surface for a long time. We're starting to get some clarity on what they're going to mean in terms of the election. And so while today politicians are running around trying to hold rallies, trying to do appearances, trying to raise money, trying to register voters, trying to not make any gaffes, what we are all sort of missing is this underbelly, this current that is running under this election. And it's happening not on CNN or Fox News, it's happening in the courts. There are these little battles that are being waged in a number of different states throughout the United States. Some of them are very, very important. Yesterday, we just heard about a case that came out of Pennsylvania that is going to allow ballots to be counted even after Election Day. You might be thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense. We have an election day. Why are ballots going to be counted after the election happens? Well, we're going to dive into that. We're actually going to cover a number of different states throughout the United States. And so here is a little bit of a snapshot of what we're going to cover. Now, I want to start off here by showing you this is the list of battleground states that have been identified by Politico. Politico on October 14th, they released a list that said these are going to be the swing states that are going to decide the United States election coming up here on November 3rd. And they've identified Arizona, which is where I live, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Minnesota, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And because these states are so important, there are lawsuits that are taking place in each one of those different states, and they all pertain directly to the election. Who's going to be allowed to vote? When are the deadlines? And things like that. So what I want to do today is we're going to go through 3 cases for some of the big states that I think are most relevant. We're going to talk about Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And then I'm going to give you a synopsis on the other states. So by the end of this video, we'll have an understanding about which campaign is really having more success in these little skirmishes that are taking place around the country. And as I've said, unless this is going to be an election where one side blows out the other, currently we're seeing polls that show that Joe Biden should just decimate Donald Trump. If you believe the national polls and the national media, this is not even a close race. But as we all remember, those of us who were awake in 2016, it felt that way right about this time 4 years ago. And so people on the other side are saying, hold on, not so fast. This is going to be a lot tighter than we thought. And we've seen some indications from that from the Biden campaign in general. Their campaign manager sent out a memorandum indicating that things are a little bit closer. They've done some national press indicating that maybe we should, not count our eggs yet, is what they're saying, before they hatch, because they're not there yet. Things aren't as blown away as they would, or the media would have you believe. So we want to get down to this. We want to say, well, what is really happening legally? Because if it's not a blowout, then we could be dealing with these lawsuits and more lawsuits for the foreseeable future. Unless it's a blowout, we may not know who the president is on November 3rd, or the next president. We may not know who that's going to be, because these lawsuits may just continue to materialize all throughout the country, any place that there's voting irregularities. So we need to talk about that. We need to get clear on what this is going to mean, because while a lot of people are interested in certain things, there are a lot of other issues that are important. They're all sort of hinging on the fact that we have a successful election, that we have a transition of power if that happens, or we maintain the current administration if that happens. And how is that all going to unfold? Well, a lot of it is going to take place in the courts. All right, so enough of that. Let's talk about the three different buckets that exist as I see them when it comes to election lawsuits. So there are really kind of three different areas where we're seeing challenges arising. The first is regarding deadline extensions. Okay, so there are some states, most of these lawsuits we're going to see are actually being initiated by the Democratic Party or different organizations that are closely connected to the Democratic Party, but they're filing lawsuits and they're wanting extensions on certain deadlines. So in particular, deadlines about registering, we saw those. We're kind of past that point now. Deadlines about when particular ballots can be mailed back in, and whether deadlines should be extended even beyond election day. And then we're going to be talking about postmarks. Well, what about this issue with postmarks? Is the deadline effective from the time that it was postmarked? Or what about if there's ballots that don't even have postmarks? What does that mean? The other main bucket, we're going to see some of these issues arise in, or we're going to be about the distribution of ballots and then the collection of ballots. So all of this is really stemming, of course, as a result of the coronavirus. People are upset, or people are concerned that actually going and participating in an election, going and voting in person is going to cause a lot of problems. And so the coronavirus is leading to a lot of these issues. But when we're talking about ballot distribution, they're saying that a lot of this is going to be taking place less in person. People are not going to want to go to the polls in person, so they should be sent ballots. They should just be automatically sent those documents. Well, what if they didn't request them? What if they've never voted by mail before in their lives? Should the government just send them a ballot and say, this is how you're going to be voting moving forward? And then on the flip side of that, once all these ballots go out, are drop boxes allowed to collect them? How many? Where should these things be located? There's a lot of issues about sending out millions of ballots to people who may not have requested them. What are they going to do with them? Is the Postal Service going to be overwhelmed? Or how are they going to get all these ballots back? And then finally, the last main bucket is going to be this ballot validity requirements. So let's say that all of the ballots go out, all of the ballots are then collected. Well, how do we know that they're valid? Are they going to be requiring that the signatures match on the outside of the envelope, on the inside of the envelope? There are some states that have notary or witness requirements, meaning if you're going to be voting absentee, you have to have somebody sign off that it was you, so it's confirmed that you are who you say you are. There's been some issues about envelopes. You may have seen some of these headlines that there are some states that require you to put it in a secret envelope, and then the secret envelope goes in the big envelope. Some people aren't using the big envelope, or some people aren't using the secret ballot envelope. And so if those are the rules, if the statutes and the laws say that they have to follow a particular format and they don't follow that particular format because they're not familiar with how this stuff works, are we going to count those ballots or not? Are we going to require people to use identification cards? We're going to be talking about felons. Can they vote? Something is happening there out of Florida. And then again, these postmark dates again. So a lot of issues are taking place. And of course, the big fourth issue there is going to be the Kanye West lawsuits. Kanye West is getting sued all over the place. His campaign is, or they're suing states to try to keep him off the ballot in a number of different jurisdictions. So, there's lawsuits for everything, even for Kanye. Nobody can escape the ballots. Now, the lawsuits. Now, what we're talking about is, we're going to jump off with Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania was in the headlines yesterday. Pennsylvania Democratic Party is suing the the Secretary of State for the Secretary of Commonwealth from the state of Pennsylvania. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually break down who the different parties are. This kind of was a little bit of a flashback to law school for me when we have to brief cases. When you brief a case in law school, what you want to be sure that you're clear on is who are the parties, who is suing whom, and what's the reason, what's the issue. And in this particular case, we are seeing that the Democratic Party was suing or filed a lawsuit, filed a claim, filed a complaint against Kathy Boockvar from the state of Pennsylvania. And so the original lawsuit, let me move myself up out of the way here. The original lawsuit was the Democrats actually filing the complaint against the Secretary of the Commonwealth, Kathy Boockvar. You can see her here. She is somebody who is with the Democratic Party. And so you're wondering, well, why is the Democratic Party suing somebody else from the Democratic Party? And it's really not about that. Like, they're not suing her individually. They have to file a claim against the government entity who's responsible for monitoring and maintaining and running the elections, who happens to be Kathy Boockvar. So now what we have is the Republican Party joins in the response, and then a number of other people just sort of pile into this thing, and it turns into this big lawsuit. The big issue that's surrounding this one is whether or not they're going to be counting mail-in and absentee ballots that were postmarked by 8 p.m. on Election Day. Okay, so let's think about that. If they're postmarked by 8 p.m. on Election Day, then you're good to go, right? It's done by Election Day. But they're saying that they want them to be received by the boards by the deadline, which is basically the out-of-state absentee ballot deadline. So they're trying to essentially push this stuff back to say they're trying to change this from the original law, which was the ballot had to be signed, received, delivered in possession of the government who's going to be doing the tabulating on the race by Election Day, right? By 8 p.m. on Election Day. We have to be in receipt of it. We have to have it. So what this lawsuit is asking is demanding essentially that they change it so that as long as it was put in the mail, as long as it was closed, sealed, and mailed, it doesn't have to be received by the ballot office for it to count. As long as it was in the mail, as long as it was on the way, that's sufficient. And so you may be saying to yourself, well, what's the difference between 3 days, 5 days? What does it matter? As long as it was mailed prior to Election Day, we want that vote to count, right? Well, the issue here is that that's not what the law was, right? The law said something, and then it changed right before an election. So the law originally said that this needed to be something that was done, signed, sealed, in place, and then it got moved. And now what many people have concerns about are, well, we know that many of these mail-in ballots are postage paid, right? You don't even have to put a stamp on it. So what happens if a bunch of those ballots are not postmarked and they just show up at the ballot office 3 days later? You could envision a scenario pretty clearly where you have a state like Pennsylvania, which is a battleground state, which is something that both sides need to win in order to secure the presidency. And let's say, for example, that Donald Trump is squeaking out a win. Maybe he's up by 10,000 votes in Pennsylvania on election night. Well, you would say to the Democrats, under this proposed rule, you would say, okay, well, we know that we're losing the vote right now. So what happens if we just go get 11,000 votes and we get all of those in the mail at 7 p.m., 8 p.m. on election night, even though the post office is closed, so they can't postmark it? And what happens if there are no postmarks and all of those ballots get delivered to the ballot office 3 days later? Then they count them. Then you may have a situation where on election night, Donald Trump was the winner, but on 3 days later or 4 days later, whatever the rule is in that state, Joe Biden becomes a winner. Or it could be the reverse of that, right? It could be the exact opposite situation. The reason why I use it in that context is because the Democrats are the ones who are asking for these extensions in almost every one of the cases that we're going to go through today. And so, many people are speculating that maybe they have a very good ground game. Maybe they've got a plan in place where they can go and raise a flag and summon up a bunch of votes from their union compatriots or whatever you want to call them, but from different organizations, from different sort of contingencies within their party. It's certainly, I think, a valid concern. And so that is the original claim. Now, what I wanted to do is show you a little bit of the procedural history. And this is how this stuff progresses. And this is why it is now just now coming to fruition. So let's take a look at what the procedural history looks like here. So let me throw myself back down there. All right, so if you back this up, you're going to see that on July 10th, that the original complaint was filed by the Pennsylvania Democratic Party. Okay, so the DNC, the Democratic Party out of Pennsylvania, filed the lawsuit, the original lawsuit. And what I would like to do, see if I can get this going here, but I would like to actually show you this complaint. Let me see if I can. All right, so I'm going to pull that up separately. Let me run through the rest of this criminal or this procedure. So on August 16th, then it goes up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court issued an opinion. Then the Republicans filed a stay for the proceeding, meaning they didn't like the opinion, so they wanted a hold on the opinion. And then this all went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court actually was going to hear the stay, but we had a ruling on that yesterday. But before we get there, I do want to see if I can pull this up. Apologize while we're getting this moving here, because this is a live show, and so sometimes we'll have a little bit of technical difficulties. But I do want to just show you this because I think it is kind of fascinating at how extensive and how detailed this complaint is. All right, so if you look here, you will see that this is the actual complaint that was filed in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So you can see all of these different parties. These are petitioners. A lot of these people, including the Pennsylvania Democratic Party, they're filing this claim. They're suing the Secretary of the Commonwealth and all of these other people. Okay, all the different board of elections. They're naming everybody in this complaint. So it's a big thing, right? A lot of work is going into this complaint. And you're going to see here that what they're asking for, so they're doing an introduction. They're saying, you know, these are all the people involved. We're saying that this election is occurring in the midst of uncertainty. Election laws are changing. These are big issues. Donald Trump is a terrible person. Look, he's undermining the election. He's saying it's being rigged. Bush versus Gore. You remember how bad that was. So the complaint just goes on and on and on, right? And it's identifying a number of issues. Some appropriately require a statewide solution, policies issues, voting by mail. It's laying out a long framework. And the reason why I just want to go through this is you just see kind of how in-depth this is, right? This isn't just a minor issue. This is somebody putting a ton of work and a ton of money into this case. This complaint is something like 56 pages long, and we're looking through here and we can see these are the parties who are involved. We already established jurisdiction. They're in the right courtroom. These different questions are now sort of appearing out of thin air, out of all the different Commonwealth laws. We've got, on and on. Look at this thing. And finally, we get to the coronavirus. The novel coronavirus started in December 2019. It's been just, evolving over this time. We've got a series of orders, emergency declarations. We've got more COVID problems. Trump's got a lot of issues we're talking about. You see, look at this thing. It just keeps going and going and going. Completing a mail-in ballot is not a simple task. It starts with obtaining an application. The voter must then complete the application, prove their identity. And so they're laying out how difficult it is to actually fill out a ballot, because what they're going to be asking for is a better ballot distribution, a better collection process. They're going to be asking for all of these things after they lay out the framework. They need drop boxes. They need satellite sites. They need look at this. It just keeps going and going and going. They're going to need to extend the mail receipt deadline. So they're just going through and they're documenting all of these different problems that they are believing that are going to just, pop up because of the coronavirus, leading to an increase in mail-in ballots, to an increase in sort of, virtual voting, and, non-in-person voting. And it just goes on and on and on, right? Look at this. Look at this complaint. So what the reason why I wanted to show you this also is because this is an expensive complaint. These are some of the things that they're asking for. Count two, they want to require boards to contact the electors that have defects and provide those voters the opportunity to cure the defects. So if you screw up your ballot, they want to give you the chance to fix it. They want declaratory judgment that boards must count naked ballots. So they're trying to sort of identify these issues. They want more declaratory judgment that the poll watcher does not violate. So, on and on and on. This was drafted by one, two, three, four lawyers from, looks like Greenberg Torig Law. Okay. It's a huge law firm, very expensive. So this complaint, just this complaint alone, we're talking about a lot of money and a lot of resources. And, you know, the main question is, are they doing that because they care about grandma not being able to vote? Is that really why all of this effort is being put into play? Or is it because they see this as a chess piece that they can maneuver in order to gain an advantage and win the state, right? Why would Greenberg Torig, or why would the DNC, why would they pay literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably closer to millions of dollars by the time this is all said and done, in order to get this lawsuit, to get this victory? Why would they do that? It's because they want to win the presidency. All right, so I had to move that back over here because I had to exit the PowerPoint, so apologies on that. But let's get back to it. So let's go back through the procedural history. What we're going to see here is that this ultimately went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and yesterday we just learned that the Supreme Court is actually not going to be hearing the case. So the only reason why, basically the only thing that we didn't get from the Supreme Court was a substantive answer on any of this stuff. So they denied the application for the stay. It was denied. This is all that we have. This is the entire order that came out of the Supreme Court. Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh, they would have granted the application. In other words, they would have limited the extension that was granted by the lower court. They would have gotten rid of that, but they didn't do that. So that extension can stay in place. And this indicates what a huge problem a 4-4 decision is, because this is how the court actually turned out. This is what it looks like. 4 judges joined the Democratic Party. 4 judges joined or would have agreed with the stay. And this is what it looks like. This is the downside to not having a 9th judge on the bench. If Amy Coney Barrett was here, she could have maybe joined one of the 2 other sides, and we would have had a more definitive answer here, but she's not on the court, and they didn't. So because Judge Roberts, who joined the left, because it's a split, what that means is that the lower court's ruling is going to stand. So the stay is voided out. The extension was granted and was upheld by the Pennsylvania courts. And so in Pennsylvania, now you can count a ballot even if it was physically received after Election Day. Okay, the original law was you had to have it in your possession. The ballot box had to have it. Now they don't. They can have it a number of days after that, and it will still count. And so when we go back to our chart, we're going to see that this is what it starts to look like. So you can see that I specifically wrote out here a 4-4 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. The lower court ruling will stand. And that means that non-postmarked ballots can be counted until Friday, November 6th, or 3 days after the election. This was decided literally yesterday, and Roberts joined the left. And so on this column, what we're going to see is which party does that benefit. The Democrats in Pennsylvania filed the lawsuit. They are the victors in the lawsuit. The extension was granted. And so in my mind, that favors Joe Biden. That's what they wanted. They got what they wanted. And on to the other states. So chalk one up for the Democratic Party. The conservative judge, Chief Justice Roberts, joined with the liberal wing of the court, and the stay is going to be voided out, and the extension is going to be allowed. So that's where we stand in Pennsylvania. Let's move on over to Wisconsin. Remember Wisconsin. If you remember this from 2016, you may recall that it was a very, very close election. The parties in this case are going to be, once again, the DNC, and we're also going to have Marge Bostelmann. So Marge Bostelmann, down here, you can see she is the secretary of the election, but she is with the Republican Party in the state of Wisconsin. So she is the person who runs the elections there in Wisconsin. The Democratic Party filed a lawsuit against Bostelmann, and the Republican Party opposed the lawsuit and joined back on behalf of the government, opposing any of the requests that the Democrats made. So let's go into the actual complaint, and you can see here, this is what they're asking for. So the plaintiffs are the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. They're asking for a preliminary injunction, and an injunction is one of those words that kind of means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but essentially what they're asking the court is for an order to do something. They want something to happen, either to enforce an extension or to not enforce a current law and allow for some leeway. They're basically looking for more time here, and they actually have 5 different things that they want in this particular lawsuit, and let's see what they are. So we can see here that both of these parties, they are going to be asking that the court enforce that polling places receive absentee ballots by 8 p.m. for them to be counted. They do not want that to happen. They want to prevent them from enforcing this requirement. So they're basically asking the court to say, we are not going to mandate that all ballots are received by 8 p.m. on election day in order for them to be counted. They're also going to ask that they do not enforce the requirement that absentee ballots be signed by a witness. So number 2, they want to get rid of the witness requirements. They want to, number 3, get rid of the photo identification requirement in the absentee ballot applications, unless the state provides a safety net as described in an accompanying brief. So they want, first of all, they want an extension of time. They want no witnesses to monitor the ballots. They want photo identification to be irrelevant. They want that people bring proof of residence to be invalid, and they want mail-in and electronic voter registration deadlines essentially extended. So this is that's a big ask, right? Those 5 things: no identification, no witnesses. They want extended deadlines for registration. They want absentee ballots to not require, all of the different requirements that already existed under the law. And you're thinking, well, wait a minute, how are they going to justify that? Well, if you go through, it's the same type of complaint that I just ran through previously out of Pennsylvania. Massive, these are big, long, substantive complaints. Actually, I think this one's significantly shorter, but still, it's a lot of law, a lot of ask, and you can see just how involved this is, right? This isn't just one attorney filing a brief. This stuff is being litigated all the way up through the federal circuit courts and over to up. In some cases, up to and in the Supreme Court. This is the procedural history that we have here. You're going to see that back in July, about the same time the other lawsuits were filed, the DNC filed the complaint in district court. District court actually granted the injunction, so they extended the ballot deadline. But then what happened was the Republican Party came back and said, no, we don't want those extensions. And so they appealed up into the 7th Circuit, which is a higher court. So then the 7th Circuit came out and they put a hold on the original injunction. Remember, the DNC was successful in the district court. The Republican Party came back. The 7th Circuit said, no, not so fast. 7th Circuit then dismissed the appeal. Then there were these emergency orders that take place, emergency order by a couple of other parties. And then what ends up happening is that the Wisconsin Supreme Court certifies the standing. We have a new case. We have a stay of the ballot deadline extension that's granted by the 7th Circuit. So there's some standing issues. The Republican Party and the Wisconsin state legislature and different entities are having issues deciding who should be filing back against the Democrats. But eventually they get it figured out. And then there's a stay of the ballot deadline extension that is granted by the 7th Circuit. So what does that mean? It means that the original authority, the original approval to extend the ballot deadlines is now reversed. It's now stayed. The 7th Circuit came back out on October 8th and said, nope, you don't get to change the rules in the election so close to the election. And then the Democratic Party is now appealing this up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so I'm not sure if, what the schedule is on that, when this stuff is supposed to be heard, but we do know what happened on October 8th from the 7th Circuit, and this is what it looks like. And it's I think a very relevant and pertinent part of the opinion. In the full opinion, I just clipped out this little subsection here. The state legislature offers 2 principal arguments in support of a stay. So remember, the DNC was filing a lawsuit. The state legislature, which is Republican, responds back, and they're saying we do not want these extensions to take place. First, that a federal court should not change the rules so close to an election. Second, that political rather than judicial officials are entitled to decide when a pandemic justifies changes to the rules that are otherwise valid. A political rather than judicial officials are entitled to make those changes. And he cites some case law here. It says, we agree with both those arguments, which means that a stay is appropriate under the factors discussed in NKEN versus Holder, right? And so this is where this argument sort of boils into these two camps. And this is really indicative of a lot of the things that we talked about when we were reviewing the Amy Coney Barrett confirmation process. Remember, we heard a lot about her talking about originalism and textualism, looking at the text. What does the text say? What does the original document say? Well, that's essentially what the Seventh Circuit is now saying. They went back and they looked through the law and they're saying, we already had these rules in place. Okay, we already know what the rules are. And the DNC filed a lawsuit and they got the district court judge to make the changes. The judge, which came right out and said, sure, we'll make those changes. The Seventh Circuit came back and said, no, you don't do that, judge. You are not the legislature. You do not just get to go and just modify and move election laws around. So the Seventh Circuit approach was taking more of an originalist view. They looked at the facts of the case and they said, yeah, okay, we're in a pandemic. Great. And we're always in some sort of an emergency. It doesn't matter what it is, but that's not enough to just have a judge just go and modify the election laws. If the judge wants to do that, that's outside of the scope of the purview of what a judge is allowed to do, because the judge already has the statutes which were passed by the state Congress. The laws are already in place. You don't get to modify those willy-nilly because you think that it should be modified because we're in the middle of a pandemic. They don't have that authority to do that. Now, somebody who's not an originalist or not a textualist, somebody who is more along the lines of they call it liberty activism, or they call them freedom activists, or an interpretation of what judges should do based upon how much liberty or how much freedom they can actually create out of a bad situation. So let's say, for example, that you're in that wing of judicial interpretation and you are looking at the facts in front of you and say, yeah, we are in the middle of an election and there are going to be a lot of people who are scared about going to the polls, and they are, nobody wants to die from coronavirus. And so maybe we should just go ahead and modify these things. There's a lot of people who feel that way. A lot of people who would agree with the district court judge and say, sure, yeah, we need extensions and we need more ballots and we need to send this stuff to everybody. And the judge is exactly right. And that's exactly what the judge should be doing, right, is their argument. Because the judge is in this impossible situation where they want to make sure that every single vote counts, but they also, have to comply with the election rules. And so we leave the discretion to the judge to craft a resolution that is going to really result in the most liberty, the most freedom, the most just outcome. That's that version of how a judge should rule. I totally disagree with it. I think that a judge should just be a fact finder and call balls and strikes and not try to craft a solution, which is what they're trying to do here. But there are two versions of it, and there are a lot of people in both camps who think that one is right and one is wrong, or at least one is not as wrong as you may believe. So this is what we're looking at now with the DNC versus Bostelmann in Wisconsin. So remember, we talked about it in Pennsylvania. The previous decision was a 4-4 decision. Remember, Roberts joined over with the left wing of the court, and it was 4 conservatives. And when we had this situation out of Pennsylvania, what happened? The lower order stood because there was no clear consensus. So if this is the same type of division that we see out of Wisconsin in DNC versus Bostelmann, then the lower court's order will stand. Right? They're not going to be able to change it. If Roberts goes over with the conservatives, then it's going to be clear that the stay is probably going to be valid, because the right side of the court is basically, from what we can gather, they're taking the position that they're going to honor the original election rules. If they try to change them, it's too bad. There's a proper mechanism to do that, but we're not seeing that happen here. And so really, it's looking like, in my opinion, this is going to be standing. So when we go back to our board here, we're going to chalk that one up over in Wisconsin. We're going to give that one over to the Trump campaign. So the Seventh Circuit stayed the district court's order granting the deadline extension and the other matters. Applications have been submitted to the Supreme Court, but a 4-4 split would uphold the Seventh Circuit order. So remember, if it's a 4-4 split, the lower order stands, and so that one would now go over to the Donald Trump campaign, because it's going to be the original ballot initiative. The original rules are going to be back in place. The DNC, who filed the original lawsuit, is going to lose that, and they're not going to get those extensions that they wanted. And so Wisconsin's a pretty important state, and that's looking like that is going to land in the Trump camp. So we've got one for Biden, and we've got one for Trump. All right, let's go over to Michigan. Michigan is another important state. This one's a little bit different, but let's take a look at Michigan. So here we have the Michigan Alliance for Retired Americans. Now, you're going to see these pop up. This group group, not in Michigan, but there's a group called the Alliance for Retired Americans, and they just sort of rebrand it for the different states. They're filing a lot of lawsuits in this election, a lot of them. And so in Wisconsin, we're in Michigan now. In Michigan, the Michigan Alliance for Retired Americans is suing the Secretary of State, again, the same party who's responsible for the election. They are from the Democratic Party, and the Republican National Committee and the Republican side of the aisle, they are filing in opposition to that. And when we go over to the procedural history, we're going to see here that they originally filed the complaint again back in June. Remember, this is all starting back in June. And there was a motion for reconsideration. They were looking to affect the primary elections. Then we have the state appeals court, which does extend the ballot deadlines, and then it curbs the voter assistance ban. Then when we go to October 3rd, so just very recently, we see a motion for an injunction of the state court order filed by Ruth Johnson. And we're going to see other response motions that are being filed. So filed by the Michigan Alliance. We've got Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State. So again, Benson again. So that's what we're seeing here, right? Now let's take a look at the complaint. And the complaint says, so this was what was originally filed by the Michigan Alliance. It says that they want an order that declares that the ballot receipt deadline violates the Constitution in Michigan, and then they want preliminary and they want permanent enjoinment of the secretary from, and basically everybody under her, from enforcing the ballot receipt deadline. So they don't want the original deadline, and they want that the court order that they count ballots received within 14 days after Election Day. 14 days, that's 2 weeks after election. So the original rules were saying that they needed to receive the ballots the day of the election, right? We all want to know who won the presidency. What they were asking for out of Michigan was to actually extend that for another 14 days. And this brings up a good point. You know, if these lawsuits were filed in June and the local and state governments were, busy trying to sort this stuff out, what's an extra 2 weeks going to do there? Really? Other than just provide an opportunity for what in my mind is improprieties. Let's just leave it at that. So the complaint goes, they wanted a 2-week extension, but then when we dive into it a little bit further, let's take a look at the ruling from the lower district court. Okay, so the Alliance files their lawsuit. They submit it to the district court, and the district court comes back and says, yeah, this is a judge. So a judge looks at all of the election rules, looks at the entire state, and then says, yeah, this doesn't really sit right with me. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to, the court is just going to modify everything. We're just going to create a solution that we think is fair, and we're just going to, put that out to people. So that's what happened here. This was a ruling from the Court of Claims, which took place in Michigan, and it was written by Honorable Cynthia Diane Stevens. And here is what she put in her order. So she said that the court enjoins this law, so that meaning they're basically preventing this law from 5 p.m. Friday until the close of polls on November 3rd, insofar as it limits the class who may render an absent voter assistance. So there's some law saying that this is a requirement to help with voters. So there's some sort of voter requirement, voter assistance law. They're saying this law is not going to be applicable from October 30th to November 3rd. So other people can go and help with voter assistance. As a result, a voter casting an absent voter ballot in the election may select any individual the voter chooses to render assistance in returning an absent voter ballot, but only for a limited time period when the clerk is not required between these and these days. So what is that saying, right? There's a law in place that says that if you're going to be voting absentee, if you're not going to be voting in person, then you can get help from somebody, but it's got to be somebody close to you. In this case, I think it was a family member. You can have a family member help you. You can have a legal guardian help you. What they're trying to do is avoid people from getting taken advantage of, right? If you're going to go to an old folks home or a senior living center, whatever the appropriate term is for that, you go there, and if you're able to just go collect everybody's ballots, maybe you just go and collect everybody's ballots and you take those and drop those off. And what happens when that individual party goes, and what do they do with those ballots? Do some of them make it? Do some of them not make it? How does it work? And so, we don't want people to get taken advantage of. What if you have a 95-year-old grandmother with dementia who is, really, really anti-Trump, and you say, hey, grandma, and you go over there and you say, hey, let me turn your ballot in for you, right? The court is going to say, well, we're going to let you go over there because there's a familial relationship there. And so if you take that really anti-Trump ballot and you happen to be pro-Trump and you throw that in the garbage on the way out, well, we just kind of chalk that one up. But we have a little bit of a protection line there because it's between a grandmother and a grandson. But what happens if you just have anybody who can come in there and now have a relationship with anybody who's casting a ballot? You send that person to an old folks home and they just collect every single ballot that they want, whether there's a relationship there or not. And so that little bit of a safeguard that would say that a family member wouldn't jeopardize another family member's ballot is out the window. Now, anybody, according to this judge, can go and they can help in returning an absent voter ballot, only for a limited time, but anybody can go do that. Now, the other part of her order goes on, and they're talking about these ballot deadlines. Says here that enforcement of the ballot receipt deadlines are further enjoined. So there's a rule here and a rule here that they're going to enjoin. These relate to the date and time by which the ballots must be received by the clerk in order to be tallied. So the limits, the time limits, are now going to be moot, according to the district judge. All ballots postmarked no later than 1 day before Election Day and received by the deadline are eligible to be conducted in the same manner. So as long as they're postmarked no later than 1 day before the Election Day and they're received by the deadline for certifying election results, are eligible to be counted in the same manner as all provisional ballots. Again, this goes back to the postmark issue. There's a lot of concern that many of these ballots will not be postmarked because the postage is paid for. So the post office just picks them up, doesn't stamp them or postmark them, and just delivers them to the end user, whoever's going to be counting the ballots. And so now the thought is, well, what happens if on November 3rd at 9 p.m., we need to go find a lot of ballots for one side or the other? Doesn't have to be the Democrats, doesn't have to be the Republicans. Somebody needs to go find those ballots because we're about 30,000 ballots short of winning the state. And now there's an opportunity for them to do that. And who is going to argue with that? And what is that argument going to look like? What happens if suddenly on November 4th, there's 50,000 ballots that show up and they're all not postmarked? What happens, right? You could make a pretty good argument. You could presume that those were mailed before Election Day. Could you? Maybe. Maybe you couldn't. But what are we going to do with those 50,000 ballots? What are the courts going to do with those? If those are thrown out, are those 50,000 disenfranchised voters? If they're counted, did we just count 50,000 illegal votes because people weren't following the original election rules? So this is just ripe for issues across the board. And I think it's personally going to be messy. But let's see what happened in Michigan. Let's take a look. So in Michigan, they actually blocked these extensions. So they blocked the 2-week extensions. This article came out on October 16th from the AP. It says that the absentee ballots must arrive by Election Day in order to be counted, said the Court of Appeals. So that original order I was reviewing with you got reversed. The Court of Appeals said Friday they're going to be blocking the 14-day extension that had been already ordered and that was being embraced by the key Democratic officials in this battleground states. Any changes must rest with the legislature, not the judiciary, the Republican-appointed appeals court said in a 3-0 opinion. And so the synopsis here was that the Michigan law said that absentee ballots must be returned by 8 p.m. on Election Day. That was the original law. Court of Claims ordered that any new ballots that were postmarked by November 2nd could be counted if they just arrived. So you see the difference there? One said that they needed to be received by Election Day. The other judge came out and said as long as they're postmarked by November 3rd, they can be received later than Election Day. And so this court basically reversed that entire opinion on it. And the judge reasoning was the Constitution is not suspended. It's not transformed even in times of a pandemic, and judges do not somehow become authorized in a pandemic to rewrite statutes or to displace the decisions made by the policymaking branches of the government, said Judge Mark Boonstra in a separate 10-page concurring opinion. Benson and the Michigan Attorney General declined to appeal Stevens' ruling, leaving it up to the Republican-controlled legislature to intervene. So, I mean, makes sense to me. If the rules are what the rules are and a judge wants to rewrite them, that's not appropriate for the judge to do that in the middle of an election season. If they want to make policy changes, those policy changes should go through the formal process, go through the Congress, the state House, the state Senate, the state legislature, get approved in both houses, go up to the governor's office, and get signed into law before it becomes valid. But what we saw here was just a district court who said, yeah, that sounds like a good argument. Yeah, I mean, I agree that coronavirus is a big problem and we should probably make some modifications. And I don't think the elections are particularly fair anyways. So we're just going to extend those deadlines. 14 weeks sounds good. And we're going to do all of these different things. Well, the Court of Appeals came back and said, no, that is not okay. We're not going to allow that. And so when we add them to our list, here's what it looks like. We've got now out of Michigan, the Michigan Court of Appeals blocked the lower court's deadline extensions and other election adjustments regarding collection of ballots, and there are no plans to appeal. So this just goes over to Donald Trump in my reading of this particular state. And so the big question is, well, what about the other states, right? There's a lot of other states. And let's just fly through them. I'm not going to go through the same analysis with all of them. I did the same analysis more or less on each one of them. And here is what it looks like. If you are a Trump fan, I think it is looking in your favor for the most part. So in Arizona, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals did grant an emergency stay of the lower court ruling, which authorized signature corrections for 5 days after the election ended. So in Arizona, we had a situation where they were saying that if you submit these ballots and your signature is not okay, or there's something wrong with it, that the Democratic Party wanted additional time for people to be able to go and fix their ballots, more time to go and make those corrections. Well, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said, no, we are not going to do that. They granted the emergency stay. Again, the lower court here authorized that extension. The Ninth Circuit came back and said, nope, we're not going to do that. It's done on Election Day, so get it done. We go over to Florida. Florida, there was an issue about whether felons should be allowed to vote. And so you may have seen some of these headlines in the news, but Michael Bloomberg was, I think, creating this big fund, and there were a lot of people pouring money into this fund in order to pay felons fines down so that they could then reinstate their right to vote. And so why would they do that? Well, traditionally, according to, I don't have any confirmation of this, but the popular sort of common notion is that felons and criminals, or ex-criminals in this case, vote for the Democrats at higher numbers. That's just kind of been the long-standing common knowledge. I don't know if there's any evidence to back that up or not, but when you think about it, the Democrats always traditionally have been wanting felons to have the right to vote. And I'm not opposed to that as a side note, but that's the theory here, that the Democrats wanted to sort of unshackle a bunch of felons in Florida, give them the opportunity to vote. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I have a lot of sympathy with that. If they've served their time and paid their fines, then they should be allowed to vote. They've paid their debt to society, so why shouldn't they be allowed to vote? But in this case, the argument was not just about that. It wasn't about whether or not they could just pay their fines off and then go vote. I think the argument here is that if they did pay their fines, no problem. Of course they can go vote. But what the lawsuit was, what the argument was challenging a Florida statute which said that they needed to pay this off before they could go vote. So the allegation was that was an illegal poll tax. In other words, they can't require them to pay off their fines in order to go vote. So they should be able to go vote without paying off their fines. And the 11th Circuit came back and said, nope, that doesn't count. They said that requiring felons to pay their fines is allowed. And so if you have an unpaid fine and you're a felon, you don't get to vote. So the 11th Circuit upheld the original law. And again, that goes back into Trump's favor. We go over to Georgia. We're going to see sort of the same conversation here. Same court, actually, because it's really close to Florida. It's in the 11th Circuit. They granted a stay of the district court's order, granting an extension of the ballot collections deadlines by 3 days. So another order, they were going to push that back 3 days. 11th Circuit came back out and said, nope, we're going to grant a stay of the lower court's ruling. Put that one over in the Trump camp. We already talked about Michigan, Minnesota. Ballots can be postmarked on 11/3 and received up to 11/10. So even on election day, election night, as long as you get that in the mail and it's, quote, postmarked, then as long as it's received up to 7 days later, then that's going to be valid. And so that is what the Democratic Party wanted. That's what Joe Biden wanted. So we're going to put that in his camp. Again, it's important to note that these will be accepted without a postmark based on what's called the preponderance of the evidence standard. What does that mean? Well, that means that if it's like 51%, if it's like more likely than not that this was mailed, or we can just sort of say, 51% to 49, this looked like it came in, even if it didn't have a postmark. It looks like, it feels like it came in on, somebody put it in the mail on November 3rd. If we can come to some sort of conclusion about that, then we are going to count it. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not a real high threshold. If it's more likely than not that it was, postmarked or put in the mail on 11/3, they're going to count it. So if there's an unpostmarked ballot that is received by the ballot office on 11/9 or 11/10, and they can't determine when it was put in the mail, if somebody makes a decision that says that we think on the preponderance of evidence standard that this was a validly mailed ballot, they're going to count it. And you can be the judge of that. Do you think that there may be some people who try to fib that a little bit? I would certainly hope not. But because there is so much at stake, you have to presume that there will be some people who do that. We go back over to North Carolina. So we have appeals that are pending in the Fourth Circuit. The district court denied modifications to mail-in ballot deadlines and collections rules. This case is it's kind of a little fresher than some of the other ones. No decision from the Fourth Circuit, but it's looking like the district court denied the modifications. If the Fourth Circuit upholds those denials, then we're going to look like that is going also into the Trump camp. That we've already talked about Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. So by and large, it looks like most of the states are actually adhering to the original election rules, which I think is good news. I think that's the way that it should be, especially with an election right around the corner. All right, so let's hop on over to the chat. So let's get that rocking and rolling. I just cranked that on here. What do you all think about this? I mean, do you think that, well, one way or the other, do you think that the coronavirus, the pandemic, justifies all these modifications to the rules? Do you think that the mail needs to be modified, that everybody should be mandated a ballot? Do you think that all of the witness requirements should be gone? Should we grant extension? Should we count ballots for another 2 weeks because of the pandemic and all of those things? Let's take a look at what you all have to say. And let me hop on over to the chat. And as a little bit of a reminder, Tuesdays are sort of my short days, so not a ton of time for the chat, but I'm going to fly through them right now. So I now have it open. All right. So Brad Claxton is back. What's up, Brad? Good to see you again, my friend. It shouldn't be the government's job to run your life, get a job and pay your bills, get your own insurance and stop being a leech. Taxes never help the middle class. Zulu, what's up? Zulu says, I hope they run the counts up to Inauguration Day. We don't know what childish Trumpino will do if he has time to bury us with his retaliation. So that's interesting. So I was actually kind of reading it the other way, Zulu. I was thinking that on election night, it's more likely that we would see a Trump win. If Trump is going to win anything, I think he's going to win on election night, but then we'll see some sort of trickle ballots come in after the fact. This happened in Arizona. Remember the special election with Martha McSally and Senator Kirsten Sinema? She was losing on election night, but then a couple days after that, when all of the mail-in ballots were counted, she won. So the Republican Party looked like they were going to be victorious, and then once all of the other ballots came in, she won the Senate seat. It's a big deal. So we may see a lot of that throughout the country in these different jurisdictions. But the big question will be, what is that going to do to the public mindset, to the public persona? What are they going to be thinking about this? Because if people go to bed on November 3rd and they think one person won, and they wake up on November 4th and they think and they're being told somebody else won, if you thought things were already hot out there in American political world, things may get a little even more rowdy if that comes to fruition. So let's take a look at the comments. Why don't they just start counting ballots once they have received, to avoid people trying to game the system? Yeah, that comes from Elias Diaz, which I think is a great question. And some states are doing that. I think Arizona may have is actually starting to count the ballots now. There are some, there are some concerns with that also, because what happens if now you have a situation where we know, right? The different parties know that they're underwater. What happens if Trump is up 10,000 votes in Wisconsin and those are public numbers? Well, now the Democrats can stop pouring their money into different states and only focus on Wisconsin. And so you could have this almost real-time shifting of resources around the country. And so I think a lot of the states want to sort of avoid that. A lot of the election results they may be being tallied right now, but the final numbers are not going to be released. So they're kept under lock and key in order to preserve the integrity of the election. You don't want a bunch of actors going in and trying to manipulate people or persuade people or do shady things. What if this all came down? What if we knew right now what all of the early voting ballot numbers were? And one party somewhere was in deep trouble in one particular state, and they needed to go do something in that state in order to swap those votes. I think you're going to be inviting a lot of misconduct, a lot of malfeasance in an environment like that. And so states want to protect against that. And that's why a lot of this stuff is kept quiet up until the election day. Now, I'm not an election attorney, but this stuff is certainly interesting to discuss. I agree that if it's a Trump win, we will know immediately. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if he just claimed it right now. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either. At R&R, I think Congress set us up for a complete disaster as they refuse to adapt to the current situation. I agree with that. Again, I'm not somebody who knows what the answer is to this election stuff, but it is kind of amazing to me that we live in 2020. We have more data than we've ever had. We've got more technology than we've ever had. We've got, the brightest minds in the whole world, in Silicon Valley and other parts of the country, developing these really robust, just amazing, secure systems and all this stuff, and we can't figure out how to vote. And the coronavirus happened. We knew this thing was coming in March, April, May, and we still haven't figured this out. Our government is so incompetent that they can't even figure out how to conduct an election in their localities. It's ridiculous, but that's what government does. Unfortunately, is they cause a lot of problems. They don't solve a whole lot of them. 2 chimps running for president. What happened to this country's politics? So that comes from Uwe Uwe. The NSA is watching. We'll most likely know who won Florida, at least on election night, which is good, but I'm really hoping that it doesn't take weeks for some of the states. Baba Smith says McSally with 4 hearts. More corruption than we've ever had, from Eric 2G. If Trump doesn't win, it emboldens the far authoritarian far left and tells them their tactics will work, so it's a Pyrrhic victory. If Biden wins, it will be safer eventually with Trump. That comes from Mark Taylor, it assists with the divide. Get over it, since voting is considered a right and the legal precedent seems to be that monetary barriers to voting, poll taxes, are unconstitutional. Could the same thing be argued against paying taxes on firearms? It's an interesting question. I'm trying to rifle back through some case law on that and see if anything rings a bell on that. It's a great question. I'm sure it's been addressed, but I don't know anything on that. I think you could make an argument for it, certainly, right? You could say that this is a fundamental right. It would be sort of the same thing as curtailing your ability to speak freely without a tax. Like what if before leaving your home, you had to pay a tax to go speak on a public street? That would certainly be unconstitutional in my mind. So why is it different for firearms? It's a good question. At R&R from Gigi, do you think the election going to the House would be a good season finale for the year 2020? Yeah, I do. I think that would be good. Is there anything else that would happen in that situation? I think that would be interesting. Yeah, that would be interesting. There's a lot of different things that could happen. I think that would be very interesting. You got my mind spinning on that, Gigi. Thanks. I don't have a good answer on that, though. Hopefully it doesn't come down to that. Honestly, I would like to see a blowout one way or the other. I would really, really like to forego, the revisit of Bush versus Gore, the 2000 saga, and what that resulted in. It's not good for anybody. I mean, it's not good for either party. We want to see a resounding victory so that there's some definitiveness on what, who our president is. If either person wins and they're considered illegitimate by about 50% of the country is virtually ungovernable at that point. And we do not want that to happen. So even if my favorite person doesn't win, I would like to see a definitive, resounding victory one way or the other, because I think that's what the country needs. We need a little bit more unity in terms of governance. And I'm not going to hold my breath on that. All right. R&R, who is winning Arizona? So, I mean, according to the polls, Biden is. Arizona is a battleground state. They tell us that every year. I don't really believe it yet. When I drive around Arizona, I'm not seeing an overwhelming Trump force by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm also not seeing almost any Biden activity at all. In fact, Biden was here recently, and normally I notice that stuff, right? I notice when Trump comes in. I notice when the big politicians are coming in because I follow it in my feed. I follow all of the local, influencers and all of the news people and all that stuff. And I didn't even know Biden was in town because nobody showed up there. Nobody was even talking about it. It was just like a weird thing. I don't know what his campaign is doing by coming and making these different trips to different states and not seeing anybody. It's weird. What do you think of the Jacob Wohl and Jack Berkman situation? So I don't know anything about that. Those are not ringing a bell. Jacob Wohl. Okay, so Wohl has been involved in, along with conservative lobbyist and conspiracy theorist Jack Berkman, in multiple plots that attempted to frame public figures for fictitious sexual assaults, including in October against Robert Mueller. Very interesting. Yeah, I have not heard of this fellow, but as you can see, I have that now queued up, so I will take a look. Thank you for that. All right. Nick Skurlips says, hey, what's up? Rob Bryant says, I think Biden will try and pack the courts to favor the liberals. I am thinking that is probably going to happen. I think if Biden wins the Senate and the House, I think that they will try to pack the court, which is unfortunate. Eric 2G says, I don't think Biden is the problem. It's Harris we should be worried about. Biden wouldn't last 4 years. Biden said, this comes from the Nito God, Biden said that he will give his position on adding justices to the Supreme Court before the election. Do you think he comes out for, against, or continues to dodge? That's very interesting. So I hadn't seen that. I have seen him say that he's not in favor of packing the court. I've seen him say that. That's it, though. And I think he was actually referring to the Republican version of court packing. Remember, they tried to redefine what court packing is. We spent a lot of time on this channel talking about the different variations of that word and what that means. I even have a visual diagram of what that looks like on the Supreme Court. And so when I think they're using the phrase court packing to talk about Republicans putting judges, filling vacancies on the court. If that's what Joe Biden's talking about, he says, I'm not a fan of court packing. That doesn't address the question. It's not the issue. The question is about packing the Supreme Court by adding new justices, not filling vacancies like they're doing with Ginsburg's seat, about literally adding new seats. So taking it from 9 to 13 or 15 or 17 or whatever in order to modify the outcome of cases that go in front of the Supreme Court. So if he's talking about, I'm not a fan of court packing in the Republican context, we have a hint on what he's thinking. If he's talking about, I'm not a fan of actually packing the court as is generally understood, that term to mean, then that is indicative of what he intends to do. However, I do not think that the Democratic Party, if they win the presidency and the Senate and the House, I don't think that they're going to be able to get away with not adding justices to the court. I don't think that the party will let them do that, which I think would be catastrophic. Truthfully, if you want to know my true opinion on that, I think it would be catastrophic for the United States. I think that the court would lose almost all legitimacy, and we would feel the effects of that for a very, very long time. So I really hope that doesn't happen, but we'll see. Zulu says Biden should release his position when we get Hillary's emails. My understanding is that that is his adequate justification for withholding. At least 2 years as the playbook is to reverse most Trump policy. I think that's true. Democrats changing the definition of court packing is just like the media changing the definition of fake news, flash mobs, and peaceful protests. We've seen a lot of that lately. We didn't talk about this on the channel, but I was talking about this with a couple people here earlier today about this issue when Amy Coney Barrett was testifying in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Something came up about this conversation about sexual preference and sexual orientation, and literally in real time, the dictionary definition was modified. So it came from defining sexual preference as being just a regular term with a definition that describes a certain tendency of one person to now being an offensive term because Amy Coney Barrett used it. Literally, there are screenshots the day before this term came up and the day after, and they just went in there and they just added, oh yeah, this is offensive now for some reason. We're seeing definitions change all across the board, and it is certainly concerning. All right, so we just went to, let's hop on over here. Somebody suggested that we go to a certain website. So when we go to Antifa, let's turn off this chat here. When we go to Antifa, Antifa.com, it forwards right over to Joe Biden. Look at that. That came over from Gigi. Yep, pretty interesting. If you can't play by the rules or change the rules, change the meaning of the rules. That comes from Sniper Jared. Democrats are already talking about reconciliation, revenge against the Republicans. What a great reason to... no, we don't want to do that. Okay. Do you think the Supreme Court has already lost... Do you think the Supreme Court has not already lost a lot of its legitimacy? You know, I don't think that they have quite yet. I don't think that they have. I think it's actually been moderately apolitical. And I think in large part that's due to Judge Roberts. He has, I think, bent over backwards to try to not undermine the legitimacy of the court. And he's been doing that by crossing over. You saw that with the Obamacare Act, or the Obamacare case, where he actually joined the liberals. And I've talked about that here. I think that's probably the best example of Roberts really thinking about the court's credibility and the court's legitimacy. He's the Chief Justice, remember. So this is all sort of within his wheelhouse. He's got to make sure that people respect the court, because as we've talked about here, the court doesn't have any enforcement mechanism. They can't make either one of the other two branches of government do anything. Just like it's a separation of powers, it's equal balance, right? There's checks and balances across the board. And so if the court now suddenly becomes, we add 4 liberal justices to it, it just totally undermines the credibility of the court, because now every single decision is looked at through this conservative liberal lens, and it's becoming clear. If the court was packed, it would be very clear that they were doing that with a political end in mind. And I don't think that serves the court well. So it certainly is political right now. There's no question about it. But if one party just went through and said, sure, that's fine, we're going to add 4 judges. Well, what happens when the Republicans gain control? Then are they going to add more judges? And they're just going to keep expanding the size of the court until how many people are on the court? It's kind of ridiculous. And I think it's been in 9 for 150 years. I think if we modify that, I think that's going to be a problem. And we'll see what happens. I really hope that they do not do that. All right, so let's take a couple other questions, and then I got to get going. Antifa is still just an idea, even though their domain name ports over to Joe Biden. Kenneth Slayer says, Roberts is losing my respect for the court. A lot of people feel that way. Roberts was really solid during his confirmation hearings, and then he's been slowly, sort of morphing from an originalist into something else. Why does the court even need legitimacy? We have no meaningful recourse. That's how tipping points work. Well, the court needs legitimacy. Otherwise, they're superfluous. They're not necessary. If the court issues a ruling, so let's think about that. Let's kind of flesh that out a little bit. What happens if the court is packed? They add another 4 judges to it. And so now we have, let's say we have a 7-6 split. 7 liberals, 6 conservatives, or we've got 8 liberals and whatever the numbers are, whatever they are. Let's just think about it, right? They pack the court and they add a bunch of leftist judges on there. So now what happens when a Republican is in the White House and they have a Republican Congress and they pass a bill, and Congress sends the bill over to the president and the president signs the bill, but then it goes over to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court finds that that new law is unconstitutional. Well, what if the Republicans say, okay, that's fine. Well, there's a bunch of liberal judges on there who we think shouldn't even be on the court. And so we're just going to go ahead and we're going to do this thing. The executive branch has all of the enforcement power. They've got the Department of Justice. They've got the FBI. They've got all of the federal agencies, or a lot of them, under the purview of the executive branch. They are the enforcement branch. And so if the judiciary says, well, no, that law is unconstitutional, you can't enforce that, and the Republicans say, What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? Nothing. The court can't do anything. The court can only operate. Their power is in their legitimacy. Their power is in the people. We, the people, look at the court and we say, all right, look, it may be left, it may be right. It's kind of equally split, but this is what we agreed to. They are the referees. They get to decide the rules. But if you think that the referee is playing for the other team, then are you going to follow their rules? Are you going to follow their calls? Probably not. And so that's what we're talking about. That's why I think it's so fragile. If the court gets packed, we may have a situation where the parties and the branches of government just say, we're not going to work anymore. We're not going to follow your rules. It's too political. That would be a big problem. That's why legitimacy is so important. Sniper Jared says, R&R, are you aware of Robert Barnes and Viva Frey? Yes, I am. I subscribe to both of them. I follow their show on Sundays. I don't watch it every weekend, but I do usually catch the highlights of it. I think it's great. I love them. Both of them actually have, kind of inspired me to be a little bit more vocal and a little bit more, produce a little bit more content and stuff. And so I really appreciate their work. I don't always agree with them, but I think that they're both, very, very good content creators, very good, strong thinkers. I really like their analyses and how they view things. And so I do follow them. Yeah, thanks for bringing them up. If you're not already following those guys, I think they have good things, good content, good stuff to follow. Travis Reed, could Trump not just pack as well? He could. Yeah, I mean, he could if he had the House and the Senate and the presidency. Do you support Ted Cruz in a constitutional amendment to lock the SCOTUS at 9? Well, not particularly. I mean, I don't think so. I don't think I support a constitutional amendment for that. I mean, if it came about, I would support it. I have a lot of problems with constitutional amendments that limit the original functionality of the U.S. Constitution. So for some reason, we passed an amendment that capped the House of Representatives at 400 and something, I think 435 members. Well, that wasn't in the original Constitution at all. So now what we have is sort of a Senate with 100 members and a House with 400 members. And that's not what the Constitution was talking about. That's not what we wanted, right? We wanted a House of Representatives, and we wanted those representatives to be representative of the people. So maybe we should have more representatives, okay? More, not less. It was supposed to be different than the Senate. So there are certain provisions, I think, that were put in place for a reason, but are being capped for practicality reasons and stuff like that. But it's a good discussion point, and I certainly would be open to the idea, but I would need to think about it a little bit more. But my initial instinct is no. Right? There's a reason why Congress gets to set the size of the Supreme Court, and there's good reasons for it, and we don't just throw that stuff out because of a threat of packing the court. I think that the people really should be the ones that hold their politicians accountable to say, look, you guys lost it. Ginsburg could have stepped down during the Obama years. She didn't. There's a lot of different ways that you could play the Supreme Court game, but the Democrats just have not done a good job of that. Now, because they're upset about that, they want to change the rules and pack the court a little bit, but it should be the people who get to voice their say. People get to elect the senators who get to make those decisions. I think that is the best check on that power, not necessarily creating even more laws. NSA is watching. Love Viva Frey and Robert Barnes. Yeah, good guys. We messed up the Senate when we made them popularly elected, changed the balance of powers. Nick Gurr is asking who I'm supporting. It's a good question. I'm not giving an official endorsement on this channel, but I think you kind of know where I'm leaning on this. I will tell you this. I consider Joe Biden to be the godfather of mass incarceration in my lifetime, for sure. Passed the 1994 crime bill, passed a series of other crime bills. I think there's no other person who's living today who can take that mantle away from Joe Biden. He is the godfather of mass incarceration. He has in his second in command, Kamala Harris, who is a former prosecutor who's also responsible for putting many people in jail and prison for ridiculous things. Me as a defense attorney, I think that having those two in the White House would be about the worst thing I've ever seen for those reasons. Now, there are other policies I agree with, but this channel is about criminal law. I'm a criminal defense attorney, and that's my take on those two. Thoughts on Joe Jorgensen? I'm a big fan of a lot of the libertarian concepts. Looks like Let's hope you don't get canceled for saying Nick's name. I certainly don't want to get canceled. Yeah, that would be a problem. Joe Biden gives you more business, though, right? It's not about the business for us, really. I mean, it's about helping people. I have a lot of issues with, this idea that Joe Biden is criminalizing people and therefore we get new clients. What I see happening to these people who come in the door is just wrong, just across the board. People get treated very poorly in the justice system. They're not well taken care of. And remember, most of the people who are going through the justice system, whether you want to believe it or not, this has been my experience. My team and I, we've helped thousands of people, are very good people. They had one bad night. They had an argument. They've done something that is a very isolated incident, but that's not who they are. They're mothers, they're fathers, they're, brothers and sisters, parents. They're good people. And sending them to prison for a marijuana violation or something like that is insane. And that's what a lot of these politicians have been demanding for a long time. And now they want to change their tune because people are now getting sick of it. All right. When the Senate was appointed by state legislators, it was to put a cap on federal power. Careful reading that out loud. Yeah, I have to be careful about some of these names in here. Did you or do you support the police or BLM? Another one from Nick Gurr. I don't. I have disavowed all of the protesters, all of the BLM, all the Antifa stuff, and our show is about specifically calling out the bad police. So I certainly do not support the bad police, but I do think that we need more good police. I really support the good police, the people who speak out, the people who will report on other bad officers. I want more good officers. I want more transparency, more accountability within the police department. And if they can comply with some of those standards that I think are appropriate, then of course I support the police. I support law and order. I do not want people committing crimes. I do not want to defund the police or any of that stuff. I want a functional, well-ordered, society. And people who limit that, people who impede that, either because they're burning buildings down and Molotov cocktails being thrown into courthouses, I can't agree with those. Same with the bad police officers. I can't agree with somebody shooting somebody in the back or laying on their neck for 9 minutes. That is also not okay. So I don't think it's a choice really that it's either or. Like if you support the police, you have to disavow all BLM, or if you support BLM, you have to disavow all police. I think that's too much of a black and white distinction that's not appropriate and it's not helpful. I think there are good people on both sides and there are a lot of bad people on both sides. And what we want to do is maybe turn the volume down a little bit and talk about actual solutions. I still don't know, haven't seen any proposed solutions from a lot of the leaders in the BLM or the Antifa movement. I don't know what they want. If they had a proposal, if they wanted to end qualified immunity, if they wanted to, create civilian oversight boards, mandatory body cams, elimination of police unions, or any of those things, I'm all for solutions. I love solutions. I love to help people and create solutions. So I'm open to that if they would propose them, but I don't see any yet. Right now, it's just both sides just barking at each other a little too much. Yeah, Carl Silito says, a marijuana conviction can ruin people's lives. It's just not right. 100% true. In Arizona, marijuana offenses are still a felony, which is crazy. There are people in prison for felony for marijuana violations. Blue Skies for Eve says, are you billing us for your time? No, Blue Sky, this is all pro bono. I'm happy to give back to the community. Thanks for asking, though. That's a funny question. R&R president could be the godfather of making bad criminal justice and a vice president who is the person who enforces bad policies in the biggest state. Could we have a worse combination? Okay. Do you have any specific views on the pillow and soda industry? I personally think these industries are lacking when it comes to money. Okay, so I see the name. Oh no. Okay. What are the hardest cases to defend for you? So the most difficult cases I would say are I'm still caught off guard by that comment. Oh, no. The hardest cases to defend are going to be really the cases involving children. Any cases that involve young kids getting abused, getting taken advantage of are not easy to deal with. They're difficult cases. Just got a Well, we'll leave it at that. All right. So Zulu's contributing to our about to get canceled fund. Thanks, Zulu. Zulu throws over $5 because apparently we're going to need it. We're about to be unemployed over here. All right. So hard question. All right. So that's about it for me today, folks. Oh boy, what a chat. All right. So I learned my lesson. Going to be a little bit more cognizant about the names of people here. Because that's pretty good. All right. So listen, everybody, I want to thank you so much for being here today. I want to thank everybody for helping us have this conversation and keep this train on the tracks. Mark Taylor says we need Faith back. Absolutely, for sure. She'll be back here, I think, on Thursday. So tomorrow's her last day gone. We need her back. We need somebody to keep me focused here. Really appreciate everybody. Kind of hilarious. Thanks everybody for being here. I will see you tomorrow, same time, 4 p.m., 7 p.m. Eastern time, 4 p.m. Pacific time. Really enjoyed everybody being here. Have a wonderful night. I'm